Somewhere in the Pacific, 1942, Japanese naval salvage crew is working below the waterline of a recently sunken American ship. They are there for intelligence, documents, code books, equipment, anything that might help Japan understand how the American military operates. This is standard practice in naval warfare. What they find in the cargo holds and storage compartments and maintenance bays of this vessel is not standard. It is not something they expected, and when the team leader surfaces and begins his report to the officer waiting on the recovery vessel above, he stops. He rephrases. He leaves out the most significant thing they have found. Because what they found, if accurately reported up the chain of command, will be read by officers who will pass it to commanders, who will pass it to admirals, who already know at some level what it means, and nobody in that chain wants to be the one who formally documented the gap between what Japan is capable of producing and what America appears to be producing as a matter of routine. This is not a story about a single incident. It is a story about a pattern that ran through the entire Pacific War, documented in fragments across Japanese naval records, post-war interrogation transcripts, and the memoirs of officers who served in Japan's recovery and intelligence operations between 1941 and 1945. It is the story of what Japanese sailors, divers, and intelligence officers kept discovering inside American ships, American aircraft, and American supply depots that had been captured or salvaged, and the specific institutional fear that prevented those discoveries from being accurately reported in ways that might have changed Japanese strategic decision-making before it was too late. The fear was not of punishment in the conventional military sense. It was something more specific and more corrosive. The fear of being the person who delivered, in quantified and documented form, the proof that Japan was fighting a war it could not win at the level of material production. That fear, the fear of accurate accounting, shaped what got written down, what got passed up the command chain, and what Japan's leadership was allowed to know about the industrial reality it was facing. Stay with us. The detail of what kept being found and what kept being omitted from reports is more specific and more disturbing than you might expect. To understand why what Japanese sailors found was so frightening to report, you need to understand the strategic premise on which Japan had entered the war. Japanese war planning in 1941 had not assumed that Japan could defeat the United States in a prolonged industrial conflict. It had assumed something more specific, that a series of rapid, devastating strikes, combined with the seizure of resource-rich territories in Southeast Asia, would confront America with a strategic position so costly to reverse that it would negotiate a settlement on terms favorable to Japan. The Pacific would be partitioned. Japan would control the western portion. America, unwilling to spend the blood and treasure required to retake island, fortresses across thousands of miles of ocean, would accept the new reality. That plan contained one assumption that could not survive contact with what Japanese salvage crews kept finding in American ships. The assumption was that American industrial output, while formidable, was not so far beyond Japan's capacity that a determined Japanese defense could not sustain itself long enough to make the cost of American offensive operations prohibitive. What the salvage crews found in compartment after compartment of sunken American vessels was evidence that this assumption was wrong. Not slightly wrong, not optimistically wrong, but wrong by an order of magnitude that nobody in the Japanese command structure wanted to formally acknowledge. Keep watching. The specific discoveries varied by vessel type and date. Early in the war, the gaps were significant but perhaps still explicable as temporary American advantages that Japanese production might close. By 1943, the discoveries had become something else entirely. They had become evidence of a manufacturing civilization, operating at a tempo that Japanese industrial capacity, even at maximum wartime mobilization, could not approach. And the Japanese sailors who found this evidence were, in documented instance after documented instance, reluctant to report it accurately, not because they were dishonest, because they understood what accurate reporting would mean. Before we get to the specific discoveries, you need to understand the institutional culture that made silence the path of least resistance. And that culture starts with a concept that runs through every level of the Imperial Japanese military hierarchy in ways that have no direct equivalent in Western military structures. It is the concept of facing versus losing face. Stay with us. Stop. I want you to understand something about the institutional culture of the Imperial Japanese Navy and Army that explains, more than any other single factor, why accurate intelligence about American industrial capacity kept failing to reach Japanese decision-makers in a form that could have changed their calculations. In the Japanese military hierarchy of 1941 to 1945, delivering bad news was not a neutral professional act. It was an act that implicated the person delivering it. To report accurately that American production exceeded Japanese projections was not simply to pass along information. It was to suggest implicitly that the officers who had made those projections had been wrong. And in a command culture where admission of error was culturally proximate to admission of personal failure, the institutional pressure was consistently toward reports that confirmed existing assumptions rather than challenged them. This dynamic has been documented in post-war analyses by both Japanese and American military historians, and it appears in the interrogation transcripts of Japanese officers captured or surrendered at the end of the war. One naval intelligence officer, interviewed by American interrogators in 1945, described the process in terms that became widely cited in post-war studies of Japanese decision-making failure. He said that accurate reports about American capabilities were not formally suppressed. They were simply, and he used a careful word for this, contextualized. Data that showed American production significantly exceeding Japanese production would be accompanied by analysis suggesting that the data was incomplete, or that Japanese quality offset American quantity, or that the specific items being counted were not the decisive factor in the relevant operational context. The contextualization was not lying exactly. It was the application of professional judgment in ways that consistently tilted toward the conclusions that the institutional hierarchy wanted to receive. And because the hierarchy wanted to believe that Japan's war plan was viable, the contextualization consistently produced reports that confirmed viability rather than challenged it. The salvage crews and divers who found troubling things in American ships were participating in this dynamic, whether they were consciously aware of it or not. Reporting something troubling in full was not a career-advancing action. Finding ways to minimize it or noting it briefly and moving on was. Here is a specific example that illustrates how this worked in practice. In early 1942, Japanese salvage operations on a sunken American destroyer recovered the vessel's engine room maintenance logs, which included detailed records of the spare parts inventory carried aboard. The inventory was, to the salvage crew, astonishing. The American destroyer carried a volume and variety of spare components, machined to tolerances, that Japanese naval engineers, reading the recovered documents, found almost difficult to believe, that would have allowed the crew to perform extensive repairs without accessing any external supply chain for months. The Japanese destroyer equivalent carried a fraction of that inventory, and the machining tolerances in Japanese components were less consistent, requiring more frequent specialist maintenance. The salvage report noted the recovery of the maintenance logs and their delivery to naval intelligence. The follow-on intelligence analysis mentioned the spare parts inventory in 2 sentences and spent considerably more time discussing the codebook fragments recovered from the same vessel. The industrial implication of what the maintenance logs showed, the systematic, comprehensive, almost casual abundance of precision machine components carried as a matter of routine on a mid-size American warship, did not appear in any strategic assessment that reached senior command level. It had been contextualized out of significance before it got there. That maintenance log was not an isolated incident. It was one example of a category of discovery that Japanese salvage and intelligence operations kept making throughout the war, in ship after ship, aircraft after aircraft, supply depot after supply depot. The specific items varied, The pattern they revealed did not. And as the war progressed into 1943 and 1944, the gap between what the discoveries showed and what Japanese strategic planning assumed became so wide that even the most carefully contextualized reporting could not fully conceal it. Do not go anywhere. The discoveries that Japanese salvage crews and intelligence operatives made inside American ships and installations fall into several distinct categories, each of which told a different part of the same story. The first and most immediately striking was food. American military ration standards, as discovered in the supply stores of sunken vessels, captured airfields and overrun positions, consistently exceeded Japanese military ration standards by a margin that Japanese soldiers and sailors who encountered them described in terms that ranged from disbelief to a specific kind of demoralization that their officers found difficult to address. An American sailor's daily caloric allocation was approximately twice the standard. Japanese naval ration, the quality and variety of the food, preserved meats, packaged meals, coffee, cigarettes, confectionery items, was so far beyond anything the Japanese military routinely supplied to its personnel that some Japanese officers explicitly prohibited their men from examining captured American food stores in detail. The prohibition was not out of concern for enemy material. It was out of concern for morale. An officer who had seen the gap between what America fed its sailors and what Japan fed its sailors could not unsee it. And that gap was not merely a comfort issue. It was an operational reality. A Japanese sailor on standard wartime rations by mid-1943 was receiving a daily caloric intake that American military nutritional standards classified as insufficient for sustained heavy physical labor. The men operating Japanese ships in the latter half of the Pacific War were, in a documentable physiological sense, less capable of sustained peak performance than their opponents, partly because of what their opponents found when they looked in the food stores of their sunken ships. The second category of discovery was medical. American shipboard medical facilities and the medical supplies found in them after sinkings revealed a standard of care that Japanese naval medical officers found deeply uncomfortable to document. Penicillin, which was in limited production in Japan and essentially unavailable to field units, was present in quantity in American shipboard medical stores from 1943 onward. Surgical equipment was standardized and comprehensive. The volume of specific medical supplies, bandages, antiseptics, anesthetics, pain management medications per sailor aboard American vessels exceeded Japanese standards by ratios that Japanese medical officers recording their findings chose to express in vague terms rather than specific multipliers. The human cost of this gap was not abstract. Japanese wounded in the Pacific War had significantly lower survival rates than American wounded, a disparity attributable in substantial part to the difference in available medical supplies and the consistency of their provision. When Japanese naval personnel, examining the medical facilities of sunken American ships, found the evidence of what American wounded received as a matter of military standard, they were looking at the documentation of deaths that did not have to happen among their own people. That documentation, in the dry language of salvage inventory reports, rarely made it into the strategic assessments that reached Japanese command. The personal knowledge of individual sailors who had seen it, that stayed with them. The third and most strategically significant category of discovery was mechanical, not just spare parts, though the spare parts story was itself significant. The discoveries extended to manufacturing precision, component standardization, and the evidence of mass production processes that Japanese industrial engineers examining salvaged equipment found themselves unable to replicate even when they had the physical components in front of them as reference material. American machine tools recovered in several Pacific Island operations and from salvaged vessels showed tolerances that Japanese manufacturing capability in 1943 could approach only in specialist facilities under ideal conditions. American standard production was achieving those tolerances routinely at volume across the entire industrial output of a continental economy, running at full wartime capacity. One engineer's report, recovered after the war from Japanese naval files and later translated by American historians, contained a passage that has been widely quoted in studies of the Pacific Wars. Industrial dimension. The engineer wrote that examining American production components was like studying the work of a different civilization, not a more advanced civilization in principle, but one operating at a scale that made the comparison of individual components beside the point. Japan could produce components of equal or superior quality in specific instances. What Japan could not produce was components of consistent quality and sufficient quantity across all categories simultaneously. That consistency, that simultaneity, was what the salvage crews kept finding. And it was what kept being left out of the reports that went up the chain. By 1944, the gap between what Japanese salvage operations kept discovering and what Japanese strategic planning continued to assume had become impossible to fully paper over. Even with the most carefully contextualized reporting, individual officers who had spent years in Pacific salvage and intelligence operations began writing private assessments, not for circulation, not for command review, but for themselves, that documented in plain language what they had been finding and what it meant. Several of these private documents survived the war and were recovered by American occupation forces in 1945. They read in translation as the work of men who had understood the situation clearly and had understood equally clearly that saying so formally would accomplish nothing except the termination of their careers. Stop and consider what that means in human terms. These were not cowards. These were professional naval officers who had served with competence and often distinction throughout the war. They understood from years of first-hand evidence that Japan was fighting a war it could not win at the material level, and they had spent those years writing reports that their institutional culture would accept rather than the accurate assessments their evidence demanded. The private documents they left behind are not confessions of dishonesty. They are something more painful, the record of professional men trapped between what they knew and what the system they served was capable of hearing. One officer, a senior intelligence analyst who had coordinated multiple salvage operations in the Central Pacific between 1942 and 1944, wrote in his private notes that the most demoralizing moment of his war was not any battle or any defeat. It was a moment in early 1944 when he was reviewing the salvage inventory from a recently sunken American supply vessel and realized that the cooking equipment found in the vessel's galley, the equipment used to prepare food for the crew as a matter of routine daily operation, was of higher quality and more precise manufacture than the specialized machining equipment in a Japanese naval facility he had visited the previous month. He wrote that he sat with that inventory for a long time. Then he wrote his report. The galley equipment was listed under general supplies recovered. No further analysis. The strategic consequences of this systematic underreporting are not easily isolated from the broader question of whether Japanese command would have made different decisions with more accurate information. Military historians have argued both sides of this question for decades. The argument that better information would have changed Japanese strategy runs into the documented reality that some senior Japanese officers did have access to reasonably accurate assessments of American production capacity and chose to proceed with existing strategy anyway, on the grounds that the war had been committed to and the only option was to fight it. The argument that the underreporting was therefore irrelevant to outcomes is complicated by the evidence that mid-level planning decisions, operational tempo, resource allocation, the prioritization of specific theaters and capabilities were consistently made on the basis of projections about American capacity that the salvage evidence contradicted. The deeper lesson of what Japanese sailors found in sunken American ships is not primarily about industrial capacity or military production. It is about what happens when an institution's information systems are structured to confirm existing beliefs rather than accurately represent reality. The Imperial Japanese military had not designed its reporting culture to suppress intelligence. It had designed it to function within a hierarchy that valued cohesion and confidence over accurate accounting. The suppression of uncomfortable intelligence was not a policy. It was an emergent property of a culture that made delivering bad news professionally dangerous and made contextualizing it into acceptability professionally safe. The result was that Japan's strategic leadership made decisions across 4 years of war based on a picture of American capability that the men with the best evidence, the divers and salvage officers and intelligence analysts who had spent years inside sunken American ships, knew was incomplete. The Japanese officer who sat with the galley equipment inventory in 1944 survived the war. He was interviewed by American occupation officials in 1946 as part of a systematic assessment of Japanese naval intelligence operations. When asked directly whether Japanese intelligence had accurately assessed American industrial capacity, he paused for a long time before answering. He said that Japanese intelligence had collected accurate data in many specific instances. He said that what the data meant, what the full picture assembled from all those specific instances actually showed, had not been communicated clearly to those who needed to understand it. He was then asked why. He paused again. Then he said, because understanding it would have required knowing what to do about it, and nobody knew what to do about it. The Pacific War, with all of its battles and all of its dead, was in some part the consequence of that pause, of that not knowing, of the evidence sitting in inventory reports at the bottom of the Pacific, filed under general supplies recovered, no further analysis. If this changed how you think about why Japan lost the Pacific, war at a level deeper than battles and tactics, subscribe to WWII History's No Escape for Untold History every single week. Share this with someone who thinks they know the Pacific War story. And tell us in the comments, do you believe Japan's military could have changed its strategy if it had received accurate intelligence about American production from the start? We read every reply.